Next hour ahead, and we begin with Florida Senator Rick Scott, this week doing what he did as governor, fighting government spending.
Scott wants to end extended unemployment and President Biden's jobs and infrastructure plan. The
news of the week, though, was our focus when we went one-on-one late this week, starting with President Biden's executive order on cybersecurity after the pipeline shut down and how U.S. infrastructure could be so vulnerable. How did we get to this point, so vulnerable to that kind of cyber attack?
Well, first off, we all have to understand that there are bad actors out there. There's people that want to take advantage of it. Sometimes they're government actors, sometimes they're not. And everybody's got to take this seriously. Privacy is important. Making sure your system can't get hacked is important. And making sure that our significant adversaries like Russia and Communist China and Iran and Cuba, North Korea, we've got to hold them accountable, and we can't let them into our system. I mean, the Biden administration's already, since he came in, has said that we can buy things from Communist China for our electric grid. I mean, does that make any sense? Well, this just doesn't make sense.
You sit on Homeland Security. Can you give us any intel on how it's gotten to this point?
I mean, I think it's just a lack of focus. I mean, I'm on Homeland Security and I'm on Armed Services, two areas where we have plenty of discussions and about what's happening with cybersecurity. And Americans are just not focused enough. Government needs to make sure that everybody's focused. So it's, we're going to see more and more of this if we're not focused on this. And when it happens, we got to be all hands on deck. It's like a hurricane. So like if you're short of fuel, you got to get all hands on deck. How do we get more fuel in here? How do we get people better information? I do believe that one thing I've been frustrated with it, government at all levels, and I struggled to make sure this happened when I was governor, is always making sure people had good information. People are pretty smart if you give them good information, but if you put out no information, then people don't know what to do.
You know, that's an interesting point, because in South Florida was practically speaking unaffected by the attack and the lack of gas flow. And yet people didn't know that, and there was this huge run on gas because of some misinformation or disinformation. But I'm not sure, I don't want to put you on the spot if you haven't read that executive order, but generally speaking, it just lays out a lot of different standards, and a headline is many more partnerships and closer partnerships between the government and private business when it comes to standards of software and cybersecurity. You are a business guy, that's your thing. How do you hear that?
Well, first off, as a business person, it's your responsibility to make sure your system can't get hacked. Now, government ought to be helpful to you. They ought to make it, they ought to make it easy for you easy for you to do this. I don't believe, as a general rule, government standards work, because what happens is the government's way too slow. It's you as a business person, you've got to figure out how to make sure your systems are not hacked. Now, when it happens, government can be part of it. They can help go after the bad actors. They can give people good information so they can make good informed decisions. But you are responsible in your business to make sure your system can't get hacked. But let's remember, Communist China has decided to be our adversary. They should not be part of any part of our grid. They should not be part of our delivery of fuel. They should not be part of our electrical grid. They should not be part of anything like this. Nothing. Russia shouldn't. Iran shouldn't. So we have to all wake up and understand we have real adversaries. They want to dominate us. They don't like our way of life. And
Senator, I want to talk about, let's bring it home. I want to talk about a combination of last month. We got some unexpectedly low job numbers. That was kind of a temporary blow to the administration. And then coupled with this week's jump in consumer prices, I've seen reports that you've done, I've watched interviews that you've done, and you're framing this as the beginning of what might be runaway inflation. Why do you think that?
Well, historically, when government has reckless spending, we see inflation. Government has reckless spending. I mean, the amount of money that we are spending now on things that that it just doesn't make sense. We gave $350 billion to our states after they had no downturn in their revenues. Do you think any of that's going to get wasted? I mean, that's the taxpayers' money.
Well, you know, Florida got a good chunk of that change. That's allowed, the session, state legislative session just finished, and that chunk of money before and what's coming allowed the legislature to do a lot of things, fill a lot of holes, give bonuses to first responders and teachers. But what I wanted to ask you is, in this moment, might there be other factors at play, like, to your point, like the stimulus? There's a lot of money in the economy now. People are so anxious to start spending normally again. There is some bottlenecks in the supply chains. So might it be, as simple as supply and demand economics, and might this be a temporary situation?
Well, first off, as we know, it's always, I'm a business guy, it's always supply and demand. First off, government should not be paying you not to work. I mean, I said this last year when the CARES Act was passed. I tried to stop paying people more not to work than to work. We shouldn't be doing that. I've been talking to the Federal Department of Labor. It's the law that when you're off, if you don't get paid if you have a job, you don't get to quit and go on unemployment. So that needs to be enforced all across the country. It's causing all these things. You can't get enough workers. It's causing bottlenecks to cause prices to come up. But on top of that, reckless spending forever. Reckless spending has always caused inflation. And so you saw the CPI numbers up over 4%, producer price index today over 6%. I mean, a poor family like mine growing up will have a hard time making ends meet.
There's such you've been with us on this program. We interview the newsmakers from both parties, and there is, and always has been, such a difference in philosophy in taxing and spending, and we see that playing out now. Might, though, this be a time unprecedented, coming out of a pandemic, might this be a time to sort of try something new, compromise a little bit, and see whether this primes the pump? Is there any appetite for that at all?
I mean, Glenna, do you realize how much money we've spent? I mean, the federal government only collects $3.5 trillion a year. We had the best economy in our history, and we were still running deficits before COVID. And since then, we've committed over $6 trillion. Now they want to spend another $4 trillion. I mean, who's going to pay for this? I mean, I don't know who they think is going to pay for this. They say they're only going to raise taxes on people making over $400,000 a year. Do you realize they've already raised the taxes on people making, like the Uber drivers and DoorDash drivers in their first bill, this so-called COVID bill had nothing to do with COVID. And now, if you look at their spending, you will have to raise, I think, for somebody making more than $100,000 a year, you're going to have to raise their taxes something like $8,000 or $9,000 a year.
Well, that's, again, that philosophical difference. I mean, I think a lot of your opponents would point to the Trump tax cuts in 2017 that didn't really touch any of the 70 corporations that are paying zero tax because of loopholes. So that's a whole conversation, and that philosophical divide for sure. Before I run out of time with you, I want to talk about just a couple of different things. I know you and I were in Israel on the same trip a few years ago when the embassy was moved to Jerusalem, when Jerusalem was recognized as a capital by President Trump. Such a different, again, philosophy between administrations, and now we're watching something riveting South Florida right now, just this escalation in violence between Israel and the Palestinians. And this, it's a complicated dynamic for sure. It seems like Hamas is really capitalizing on what started as these protests over the settlements. I want to get your sort of perspective on how you see, in this moment, what has been such a chronic and transigent issue, now with a very new dynamic and a new administration coming in.
Let's call it by one person, Joe Biden. I mean, here's a guy that is trying to go back to work with Iran when they're the biggest state sponsor of terrorism. They're the biggest sponsor of Hamas and Hezbollah, right? And he wants to go back and somehow do business with them, all right, with no standards. He's even though the Palestinians, they don't work with Israel to try to make something happen. He wants to give them money. I mean, that's why this is happening. This is. I mean, everybody knows that Joe Biden's weak. He's going to be weak on foreign policy. He doesn't care about human rights. He's not going to hold Iran accountable. He's not going to hold Palestinians accountable, Hamas, Hezbollah, Communist China. So this is why this is happening. So my heart goes out to the people of Israel, because they're our biggest, probably our biggest ally in the world almost. And they know that Joe Biden won't stand up to defend them.
So President Biden, either late this week, had communicated to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and I want to quote here, unwavering support for Israel and the right to defend itself, sent a diplomat to Honsho some sort of beginning of a negotiation for ceasefire. This dynamic now that the capital is recognized as Jerusalem by the United States, that the embassy is in Jerusalem, that the Trump administration had actually been able to forge some new relationships and compacts with United Arab Emirates states that had not been in place before. Do you see that as maybe a framework for something different to occur?
First of all, I'm appreciative of exactly what President Trump did with the Abraham Accords, and it's historic. But let's look at what's going on. Joe Biden will say, "Oh, I care about Israel," but your biggest opponent, your biggest adversary, who wants to demolish you, he yells, "Death to Israel!" I'm gonna go work with them. Or the Palestinians who don't want to work with Israel. Oh, let me give you some money. First off, has Biden called on Hamas? Has he called them for what they are? Has he done anything about Hezbollah? Look at this.
Those are on the state-sponsored terror list. So I am being told that my time is up with you, Senator, and I always value your time. And I hope you will come back soon and visit us because we have a lot more to talk about. So thank you so much.
Bye, Glenda.
Take care.
Take care.